Welcome everybody. I'm Kevin Meek. I'm a senior account handler at Protect My Let, and I'm very happy to be here today with Carly Jermyn, who is the CEO of Woodstock Legal Services. Now, we're talking to her because she is a solicitor and a landlord herself, and she specialises in landlord and tenant law, something which is coming up a lot in conversations, certainly conversations I'm having recently. And we thought it might be very good to get her insight and tips and advice on it. So thanks for being with us, Carly.
No problem.
So I think probably something that we need to know about first of all is what kind of things do you hear at Woodstock Legal Services? What kind of complaints do the landlords the tenants make against their landlords? What kind of things happen?
Yeah, well, there's a few. I think the biggest one, and we've definitely seen a rise in it, is housing disrepair. We saw quite a rise in it, I think, post-pandemic or during the pandemic. I think a lot of tenants were, fell into quite significant arrears, and housing disrepairs were sort of the natural reaction. I'm not saying some of those claims are warranted, others aren't, but it's definitely on the rise. And there is a growth in no-win, no-fee solicitors pursuing those claims as well. So it's a big one, I feel. Still seeing, sadly, deposit protection breaches. Most of these, it's quite rare we get a complete failure to protect these days. Most landlords know they need to protect a deposit. Quite often we see minor issues with the paperwork, which is, it's very technical. And I think, it's quite easy to fall foul of the very strict rules and regulations. So,
Right.
we see minor issues with the paperwork or service of the paperwork on tenants there still. And again, your harassment, breach of quiet enjoyment, they're quite rare, and they're normally thrown in as something else, general complaints from landlords.
Right.
Yeah, they're rare, but they do happen. They're more grumbles than, significant claims against landlords more often than not.
Got you. Okay. So it's mainly, like you said, housing disrepair is the
big
main
one.
thing.
Yeah.
And then you've got
Yeah.
deposit issues. They're
Yes.
the main things.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said about the, there's little things you find in it that the landlords haven't done.
Yeah.
It's really important to make sure you've done everything, isn't it? If you're going,
important. Yeah, incredibly important. And it's making sure you've got those systems and processes that you can check, make sure that you've done everything, because even the most experienced, we're human, you make little mistakes. So your processes are incredibly important, and also documenting that you've done it. Quite often we deal with landlords, they've clearly done it, we know they've done it, but they can't evidence that they've done it. And that's a really frustrating thing, because they know it, they've been doing it for years, and it's the evidence is just not there. And as you know, lawyers and courts like evidence, so that's really important.
They do indeed. If it's not there, it's not on paper, it didn't happen,
It didn't happen. Exactly.
That's it. Yeah, we say that all the time.
Yeah.
So with regards to legal cover, like if you're going to buy legal cover, if you're going to purchase legal cover and make sure you've got everything in place, how much cover do you need? What things do you need to be covered for, and to what value?
I think it's really difficult to say value, because you have to look at it on a sort of case by case basis. But legal expenses, obviously, is incredibly useful, because whilst a lot of firms like ourselves do fixed fees on the evictions, it's when it becomes defended that costs can escalate. And I think we'll see a lot more defended claims, particularly if reforms do come in, that there will be lots more defences, I think, because you have to establish those grounds. And so that's one element. And then obviously the rent protection, the courts are incredibly slow. It's very frustrating. You look at the wait times for bailiffs in some areas, and we're looking at months, not weeks. So to have that rent protection in place is really important, because it takes off that financial pressure for at least a proportion of that time. So yeah, I think both elements are really important, and it's looking at sort of the average, cost, average wait time, what are the legal costs out there. So yeah, both really useful.
Absolutely. I mean, because some landlords, they might have a portfolio of properties, and the rent being missed on one or two isn't too much of an issue to them. But some people, they're paying their mortgage with it, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah.
And 2 or 3 months going missing really does make a dent. So yeah, I mean, that's why it's important. That's why we tell people it's important as well to have it and make sure you're covered for enough. When we get to that process, when a tenant does miss a payment, what should a landlord do? What's the first thing they should do if a tenant misses a payment and they think they're going to fall into arrears?
I think there's two things that are really important. For us, communication is really key. And when we're acting for landlords, we're constantly communicating with tenants to see if there's a way to resolve this.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to protect your position. So it's incredibly important that you serve that notice as early as possible. And that notice is valid, it's checked. And that, because we see so many, I think 7 or 8 out of 10 notices served by non-legal professionals are invalid, or like I say before, the notice is valid but we can't establish service, there's no evidence of service. So protect your position and get that right very, very early on, and then you can communicate, and then you can see if there are other avenues that you can explore to avoid court proceedings. Can you get a repayment plan in place? Perhaps, in this current climate, can they sublet? Are you happy to let them sublet so that it takes off the financial pressure from them and you've got, a nice healthy tenancy that continue? Or can you surrender the tenancy? And actually, tenant demand is very high. If this particular tenant sadly can't afford to live where they are, then they have to explore, other options. And you bring in a new tenant and actually bring it to an end, agreed by both parties, is much better than going to court.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I see. So would you say that's like, do you see that a lot? Is that a mistake that landlords make? Do they try and, failing to communicate?
Yeah, I think, and I think, the practice has long been serve the notice, push it through court, let's go that way. But actually, we don't take that approach at Woodstock. And yes, we will push things through court as quickly as we possibly can, but there's no getting away from how slow they are. And actually, if you can communicate with your tenant, always communicating with them throughout the tenancy, and very early, and seeing whether there are other options is really, really important. And if there isn't, then yes, of course, you continue with the court process. But there are other options and other avenues. We successfully negotiate surrenders all the time, and it's a much better way to deal with it than it is, going all the way through to court, and can be a lot quicker.
Okay, so I mean, the main things here then really is to just make sure, as a landlord, you're organised. Make sure you've got everything belt and braces done.
Yeah.
And if something does happen that means you do need to claim, do it quickly. Do it straight away.
Yeah, and tenancy compliance is incredibly important. Like I said, about those systems and processes, so that when you get, you have an issue of rent arrears, that you're confident everything is in order and that you can proceed safely. And it's things like making sure you've got a guarantee agreement in place. I would love to see every single tenancy with a guarantor. When we approach with a landlord who's got rent arrears, first thing we always check, is there a guarantor? If there is, we communicate very early with the guarantor and see if we can negotiate something there. So making sure all of that paperwork is in order, decent guarantee agreement or deed of guarantee, that's all been done properly, is really, really important.
And that just makes it quicker. That lets you start quicker, doesn't it, and get the process done.
Yeah, it does. Really does.
Obviously, we can't control the courts, but you can get everything in place ready.
Exactly. You're up against it, so you have to make it as easy as possible for yourself and for the courts to go, okay, rent arrears here, you deserve possession, we'll give you possession.
I mean, we've covered a lot of I think questions that landlords might have. These are common questions. I think what we've talked about. These are things that come up. I mean, is there any, to sum up everything? Could you come up? Is there any tip for a landlord? One simple tip, one thing to remember.
It's a weird thing for lawyers to talk about, but I always talk about this. But it's mindset and making sure that you realise that every single landlord is a professional landlord. With reforms coming in, professionalism is going to get, they're driving up professionalism in the industry. So you're a professional landlord and your job is to protect your asset and make sure that tenancy is compliant. And that property is an asset for you, but it's a home for the tenant. And it's respecting that and guiding everything you do as a business, looking at, the policies you may have in place, the processes you have, the systems, everything like that, and making sure you've got the right people supporting you. It's incredibly technical. This area of law. I used to just practice a little bit of residential landlord and tenant amongst bigger litigation, but it's so complex. It really requires specialist knowledge. And if you're not managing yourself, making sure you've got a really good agent that really understands those technicalities and that can support you through, which is it can be quite challenging. It's the kind of the mindset and looking at it in a really professional way, understanding your obligations, and keeping your house in order and looking at your portfolio. And I think then you can be really successful as a landlord still. And there will be bumps in the road and some challenges, but you'll be well prepared to deal with them.
And also, the part of professionalism it means a lot of people don't want to spend money. They don't want to pay out on getting a very professional agent, but it really does pay off in the long run, doesn't it? Like it's a no-brainer.
Worth their weight in gold. Worth their weight in gold. We deal with some fantastic agents, and they're brilliant.
And that's what you
Yeah.
need, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, that's some really sound advice. Thank you, Carly. Thanks for
No
joining me
problem.
today.
You're
I'm
absolutely
sure
welcome.
our landlords will love that and take a lot of good things away from it.
No problem. No problem. Thank you very
So
much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.